optionals. Occasionally, we need to have a variable that we don't want to write to immediately. We might write to it later on though. In most programming languages, this causes two problems. The first of which is that if nothing is stored, then we get what's called a null reference. And this simply means that nothing is contained in the variable. This is normally when a crash occurs, and this crash happens when your user is running the app, so it's not good. Secondly, we need to add a check for null, which means we need to write more code and write more carefully. Swift does away with this quite elegantly, but it is a little confusing at first. So let's get rid of that confusion by following along and looking at optionals inside of our playground. Now, let's have a variable called myStr, which is of type string. But we're not going to give this a value right now. Instead, we're going to put a question mark after it. And we are telling our compiler that this variable is optional. It might exist, it might not exist. And in that case, it has two sets or values that it can have, one of which is nil, which means it has nothing. The other is a value, and that value contains the actual variable itself. So think of optionals as a special data type, or it's not that special to be honest, but I like to think of it as special, that contains either nothing or something. And if it does contain something, we can get the value back. Let's try to print this. Let's have print my string. And notice what our compiler says. It's going to complain. It's running it. And, well, it's not going to complain in this case because we're only trying to print it. And it tells us we have nil inside of our string. Let's make it complain. Let's have a variable called newString, which is equal to myString, and then we're going to add on a suffix to that string. So we can kind of slam two strings together. And now we have an error. And that is because value of optional type string is not unwrapped. Did you mean to use etc. or etc.? So now we've just gotten a crash. We have an error, some fatal execution there. And that is our second crash, I believe, in this part of learning Swift. And that's because we don't actually have a value inside of our myString variable. And luckily for us, Swift or Xcode is telling us that they have an error now. And if you have this error, it won't let you compile the app and release it. It's impossible. Other languages might let you actually compile the app, which, as you can imagine, is a dangerous place to be in. Because in Swift, we can see the error and fix it before people get a hold of the app. In other languages, we might not see it. Other people will get the app and it will crash. And to me, this is one of the primary reasons that iOS is ahead of Android in terms of app quality. One, because Apple review all the apps, and two, because they're advancing with these languages. Java is a lovely language, and I like using it, but it is easier to make mistakes in Java than it is in Swift. The whole idea of Swift was to get rid of these silly little errors. So how do we check for these errors? Well, when we click this, it tells us we can insert an exclamation mark. And if we did that, what we are saying to Swift is that we are absolutely dead, 100% sure that myStr contains a string. It definitely does not contain nil. And you want to be careful with this, because I'm going to insert that. And now we have an error. So we make a mistake. And a lot of Apple Swift developers call this the crash operator or something similar to that, because it's a common mistake that lots of people make when they don't really know what optionals are and they just use the compiler suggestions to fix it. So delete that exclamation mark and let's do this the correct way. What we want to do is have a statement that says if let my str value is equal to my str. And what that's doing is it's saying if you can get a value out of my string, then I would like you to do the following with that value. So we can have my str value plus suffix. So this will only run if we actually have a value in my str. And you can see how we're avoiding those nasty null reference or nil reference errors now. So I can now assign a value to my string. My str is equal to Grant, and that should now print out Grant suffix inside of here because we actually have a value. And that's pretty much all there is to optionals. We are occasionally going to see that exclamation operator, and there are places where it makes sense to use it and it is okay to use it, and I will highlight those as we go. You also, of course, now know what question mark means. And again, when we come across it, I'm going to explain what it means in terms of the item we will be working on at that point in time.